What's up, my beautiful people? It's so great to be here with you again on another community chat with me, your host, Bucky. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. This little show we got going on, the community chat, is all about building a relationship with you and speaking with guys here in the area about what's going on in Colorado with Colorado politics, what people can be doing to make a difference, and if not that, just going back and forth with you guys in the audience. I'm going to be bringing on my great friend, Kavika Bertholet. I hope you guys enjoy the show. LibertyRevoltMedia.com. And we're live. What's up, guys? How you doing today? Lucky Lacado, great to see you. We're joined by Kavika Bertholet, founder, one of the co-founders, I suppose, of the Youth Federalist Initiative. And before we get too far, I want to give a shout out to those who have supported my GoFundMe for getting into the leadership program of the Rockies. So, Min, thank you. Walter, thank you. Christy, thank you. Stephanie, thank you. Jen, thank you. And Jim, thank you so much. Guys, you are blowing me away with all the support. I can't believe I have great pals like you. Kavika, how are you doing today, man?
Hey, I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Bucky?
Fantastic. What have you been up to?
I just got home from work.
So why don't you introduce to our watchers here who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Kavika Bertholet. I am the vice chairman for the Adams County Republican Party, and I am one of the three co-founders of the Youth Federalist Initiative, which is nationally considered a right-wing extremist group, officially by, what was that funny little newspaper? Oh, the Atlantic? Something like that.
Never heard of it.
Or we go on the Huffington Post too. So that's so it's fun. We kind of made a name for ourselves because one of my other co-founders happened to have Magacoin, and so now we are a right-wing extremist organization trying to brainwash children.
What exactly is Magacoin?
Magacoin is it's kind of like it's a cryptocurrency, but it's built around the idea of promoting Trump and what Donald Trump believes in. So populism.
Wow, that sounds hateful.
Yeah, thing. So I don't think any of us really had too much of an eye at it. You really have to grasp at straws in order to make something like that as big of a deal as to label an entire organization as an extremist group.
I want to say what's up to Lucky. Lucky, painting your kid's bedroom, huh? Did you know that before I got into the touring musician life, which was before I got into politics, I was doing the touring musician thing, and before that, I was a full-time painter. I had my own painting company.
Ooh.
Just letting you know. So Kavika, why the Republican Party?
Oh, instead of being a libertarian, even though I do have many tendencies that do have connection with libertarians, however, and constitutionalists. However, I chose the Republican Party specifically for utility. If you really want to move and shake, you have more opportunity to do that within one of the two larger parties and then working within the confines of the politics there. So the Adams County Republicans specifically, I was really attracted to because they have a lot of ties to the Tea Party, and they also have a lot of ties to local area constitutionalists and libertarians, and we tend to do a lot together as organizations, or we did when I was in my infancy there within the political organization. And since the Tea Party and the Libertarian Party had their recent transfer over, they haven't been returning my phone calls, and I just don't know why. I want to help them.
You know, it's interesting because I consider myself a conservatarian. We have a lot of fans of the Liberty Revolt who are very strict, for lack of a better term, purist, elitist libertarians. It's interesting because, you know, I would say I'm probably 80% libertarian, and I have a few things that I'm just not totally sold on. But you know, the libertarians actually have a lot of in-group diversity as well. But I understand what you're saying, talking about the utility. You know, I've had this kind of debate in my own hand: is what is the best way for me to promote libertarian principles that I actually agree with, and I think brought to their logical conclusion are the most consistent. I've gone to a lot of the libertarian groups and conventions and things, and it seems very inorganized. It seems like there's a lot of infighting between what's known as the little L libertarians and the big L libertarians and the Mises Caucus. As time has gone on, you know, my trajectory as far as my political philosophy has led me more and more into the libertarian camp. I think I would have said last year I was probably 50-50 libertarian conservative. And some people will say that that's ideologically inconsistent, but that's where I was. Ever, what's up, man? How you doing today?
Hello.
And
Daisy. Hi.
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but
it is wonderful to see you.
Daisy, appreciate you here. But as time has gone on, I've moved more and more into the libertarian camp, and I've wondered, what is the best way to promote those values? Is it through engaging with the libertarians, or is it through libertarianizing the Republican Party, at least on a local scale? And it's interesting because when I go to the libertarian conventions and I say that I'm not sure I'm a purist libertarian in like the anarcho-capitalist sense, and if you even mention the word Republican or conservative, all of a sudden, you get like treated like you're the scum of the earth. But if you go to the Republican, earlier today I was at the Weld County GOP meeting, and I told them I think I lean more libertarian. All of them were like, "That's great." You know, I feel like the conservatives I talk to, they're like, you know, I think anarcho-capitalism is a little bit utopian and unrealistic, but given the trajectory of how our government has transcended its limits over time, if you libertarians manage to pull things in that direction a little bit, maybe that's a good thing. So welcome to the club. Hang out with us. So I'm hoping the people that follow the Liberty Revolt and hang out with us can appreciate that we are devoted to principles of a free market and individual liberty. And we would like to see that implemented to the fullest extent. Unfortunately, we're a minority in society, and we may as well have to collaborate with people that we don't necessarily agree with on everything. I know Kavika and I give a lot of grief to Evan for being an authoritarian, but we hang out with him all the time.
That's because he basically is an authoritarian once you get to know him a little bit better.
He's kind of a dick, but as long as he fights the left.
There you go. Well, and you are right, Bucky. You are going to see that a lot. Libertarians tend to have a lot more angst or aggression towards conservatives than conservatives actually have towards libertarians. And I think it's actually kind of funny because it's almost like having a teenager. Now, I can talk to what teenagers are like because I'm a school teacher. I was a public school teacher. I did a lot of work with teenagers prior to where I am now, which is the elementary school level. And really, to be honest, a lot of libertarian ideas are inserted within the Republican Party, and there's a reason for all of the Republican Party infighting. Is actually we have this group of people who really want to become more moderate and really push it more in the direction that the Democrats are wanting, doing a lot of the negotiation and doing a lot of that type of work and slowly losing everything. And then you have the other kind of Republican, which it tends to be my camp, which says, is it in the Constitution? Oh, it is. Great. Let's honor that. Oh, should we be free? Yes, we should. And many libertarians think I have a few authoritative sort of viewpoints, which is true. I do believe that our freedoms need to be protected. And that's really the biggest difference between the type of conservative I am and a libertarian, is that I'm willing to have a government that does keep our social contracts in line. But I do agree with libertarians that we need to create a little bit more of those freedoms and make sure that they're preserved. And just like with education, I'm all for open school choice. Make sure that you're getting the best kind of education possible, which is one area, as an example, that I tend to lean more libertarian than maybe a hard Republican like Austin.
And we've had conversations talking about libertarianism versus conservatism on the radio show, and tried to get into that. And I think this is one of the first kind of more formal debates that I've ever had, as far as trying to argue the libertarian point and argue the Republican point. And it was a little lopsided because we had 3 Republicans, we had 1 fence sitter, and then we had 1 anarcho-capitalist Rothbardian. And I think as a matter of diagnosing what is government and the tendency of institutions of power to corrupt and to utilize that power to their own means, I think the libertarians are right about that. Where I start to get a little skeptical of some of the libertarian positions is mostly when they begin saying that once you concede the notion that it's legitimate for nations to have borders between each other and determine their own rules, that there should not be a world government, then where do you draw the line? And can someone rescind their consent to the governing structures around them, all the way down to the level of the individual? And that was the case that Kevin was trying to make, is that he does not consent to the government as we know it today, and wants to be able to just leave it and be free. And this is why the hardcore libertarians don't scare me that much, because a hardcore libertarian really believes that we should just don't aggress upon other people, don't infringe upon other people's freedoms, and people have the right to accumulate as much property and as much capacity to defend themselves as they want until they begin utilizing it against other people in corrupt means. And that really doesn't scare me. Like hardcore progressivism, that scares me because it is authoritarian and controlling by nature. And I think the libertarians, when taken to their logical extreme, are the most not threatening. However, there's some things that I have concerns with. If you are going to make the case that somebody can withdraw their consent from a governing structure all the way down to the individual level, then how do you establish any code of ethics whatsoever? How do you determine that there are any conducts of behavior that are out of bounds if someone can just say, well, I am withdrawing my consent from your code of ethics and I'll do whatever I want? And it seems that some level of government is inevitable. And I hope that the really hard libertarians and the conservatives that are watching this hop in the comments section and have a dialogue instead of just leaving, because I really, I have moved over the course of time in my ideological leanings, but I want to know more, and that only happens through communication and consideration. So I hope if you guys have thoughts or opinions about political philosophy, toss them in there. We'll try to discuss them the best we can.
Yeah.
But it seems that at some level, as so long as human beings are getting together and trying to determine a code of moral behavior, a code of ethics, they're going to have to establish some monopoly on force. Because at the end of the day, and this is what the libertarians say, all laws, all government is propped up by that monopoly of force. And as soon as the government does not have a monopoly on force, it ceases to be a government. And this is where I start to question, how do we set up a government that has a framework that limits it to the point to give us the benefits of having an organized community of people who can act collectively without setting up an institution that can turn around and tyrannize people. And it seems that you can't have your cake and eat it too. And so the question is, well, how do we structure government to maximize its utility while minimizing the inherent threat that the government poses?
Yeah, well, and that's actually exactly why Republic was such a big deal when it came out, because that's what it seeks to do. The system you're talking about, oftentimes the biggest problem with it is that eventually a bigger community that has a stronger aggression level or whatnot can come in and destroy the community structure that you've developed, and will eventually lead into some type of enslavement or other type of tyranny, as we've seen. As I was thinking about some of the things that Kevin had brought up surrounding anarcho-capitalism, in the fact that he said, "Oh, it's never been done before." That's only partially right. When you start looking at tribalism and how that worked, um, many Native American cultures had this set enforcement system that they confined in within their nation, but then they would go off and take over other nations. Same thing was going on in Africa for generations and generations. And so you get this more feudalistic type model that starts to appear, where you start having these different factions, different cultures and groups, and what they believe is correct, actually literally warring with each other. And so that's the only way you're going to fully achieve what you're looking for, is to begin to start creating something more like a republic, which is why our Constitution was originally drafted the way it was, and why we have what we have, is because our governance was intended to have checks and balances to keep our main executive branch from going completely crazy, which is what's happening now. King Polis, for example, we call him King Polis because he was given emergency powers from where? From a corrupt politician that is now. Oh, wait, I'm not allowed to say that. I am bound by contract, unfortunately. But needless to say, there are some people that if you go dig in just a little bit, you'll find out they're not too far from home in the conservative movement, that were the reason we have King Polis today. And they got a pretty sizable donation from the LGBTQ lobbies. Enough said, you'll be able to put the pieces together with that info.
We'll see. It's interesting because when we were having that conversation with Kevin, although I do have a lot of sympathy for some of those ideas, he was trying to make the case that a group of people should be able to set up their own independent community, and that they should be able to establish a code of ethics for that community, and that if you don't like that code of ethics, you should be free to leave and set up your own little community elsewhere. And our society should be made up of independent communities that have ultimate jurisdiction over what goes on within that community. And people should be kind of free to move about and find find that area that applies to them most, and that people should have the right to defend themselves. People should have the right to speak. And as he's saying this, it sounds like he's describing exactly what the founders were trying to set up. And then he was saying, well, that's not what we have. And and I agree. And then he tried to make the case that I don't consent to the structure of government that we have as today. And it's I want to abolish all these things about it. And I was like, well, first off, what we have today, in my opinion, is the natural result of anarchism. Because the way I see it, man is born into nature, into a state of anarchy, and then human beings go about the world and they establish governments. You guys were making the case, well, you kind of are consenting, because here we have tried to establish a community that's as close as possible to what you're describing. And if you don't like it, you can leave. But here you are consenting by presence and participation. And obviously Kevin's going to listen to this and he's going to say, that's not what I'm saying. He's going to want to come on here and do a rebuttal. And I hope he does, because I'm still learning more. I have been listening to Michael Malice and Dave Smith and some of the anarcho-capitalist thinkers. I've been listening to a lot of Mises and Rothbard. And they're right about a lot of things. I think they're especially right about the nature of free markets. And I really like that. And Property and Liberty, that's a book that I've been reading by Ludwig von Mises recently, that there are some things in it that I think are very profound. And I'm going to try to write some articles about them in the near future. But what did you take away from your exchange with Kevin? What did you think of that?
Well, the problem that I have with a lot of it is one, the way that the presentation is there is pretty misleading. Just right out the door. I mean, they are creating some form of government, because the government is contractual. It is developing that. And then to have an enforcing agent of some sort, there's an enforcing entity of some sort. Yeah. I mean, we have no problem with that as Republicans, because that's what we do. That's what a government
is. It's great to see our family flat earther here in the comment section. By the way, I just want to shout out, here on our social media pages, there are things we cannot say because we will be deplatformed. However, if you guys in the comment section start putting information out there, that's a good thing.
I mean, yeah, they can totally.
Maybe it's not so bad.
I encourage it. Go, please, by all means, respond, comment. If you
Jason, is the Earth flat?
Yes, tell us that I'm curious.
Make your case in the comment section below. Is the Earth flat?
I think government is flat. I agree with you. You actually have a lot of awesome responses coming in here. Like Eric Peterson has been talking quite a bit, and some of the things that he's talking about, like a true libertarianism. No, that he's right. That would not be possible in our current political climate. In fact, a republic really isn't going to be very plausible in our current political environment, because there is too much bureaucratic control right now.
Right.
And that's something that we as Republicans don't like, and we think that it is foolishness. The Earth really relis? Flat. All right. I think he means really is flat. And so, hey, I was right. I called it. I win.
All right. So, I think the libertarians are right about the nature of government, which is why I have so much sympathy for that party and that ideology, even though it encompasses a lot of things. I know some libertarians are pro-choice. I've got a weird stance on that one. I think the pro-lifers are right. I think scientifically speaking, morally speaking, the pro-lifers are right. I think it is murder. I do think life begins at conception. Ben Shapiro is famous for saying, if we found a human embryo on Mars, all the scientific papers would correctly read human life found on Mars. Um, I haven't come to a strong position on abortion. I think that's an issue. If I were to ever become a candidate, I'd probably get beat up on by both sides. I'm personally pro choice. At the same time, I feel like if somebody else is so morally deficient as to murder their own child, perhaps they shouldn't be reproducing and rearing children. I don't know. I also think it's kind of a downstream issue. I think we got to get our culture in a position. I don't know. I don't know. I'm personally pro-choice when it comes to voting. I'm personally pro-life when it comes to voting. I think I'm going to vote pro-life pretty much all the time, but it's really not a hill that I would die on.
Yeah. I was in the same position as you a couple of years back, and I took that. Oh, I'm pro-choice, but I'm actually a pro-lifer. And what I found is that people were actually a lot more embracive and accepting when I just outright embraced what I actually like stood on, which is pro-life. And the reason people were more open to that was because I wasn't trying to play both sides. They didn't get that feeling from me, but rather they got the understanding that, yes, I'm making a stand. No, I'm not going to go out there and call you a baby murderer, even though I believe you are a baby murderer if you're aborting your child. Okay. But but what it did was it helped people understand exactly who I was and exactly what I believe. And the only party that is a strong pro-life party that has a very open stance on that is the Republicans. And so in that area, I align perfectly with them. And so it's going to turn into something that you have to decide about. I'm still trying to decide what gravity is. I mean, if you go with Einstein, it's a form of matter, and if you go with Newton, it's some kind of invisible force that's dragging everything onto your head. I mean, an apple onto your head. I bet he had plenty of fun words for that.
It's interesting because earlier I said, is abortion a downstream issue of cultural factors? Do we need to get our culture under control
Yes.
Before we even talk about it? I mean, given the welfare state and given how we glorify reckless sexual behavior and reckless dating, and we've completely destroyed the social institution of marriage almost entirely. At the same time, maybe if people were responsible for the children they brought into this world, they would be more likely to make better decisions, and it would change the culture.
So,
Gosh,
things to think about when you're jumping into that thought process, right? First off, Karl Marx was vehemently opposed to everything within our social constructs. But Karl Marx is the model for our current Democrat Party right now, and why I'm so vehemently opposed to them. Moral relativism, this idea that the family should be split apart, the idea of divisive politics, all of this is directly out of him, and they're all tactics used by his accolade, Saul Alinsky. And so what you're beginning to sort of entertain in your head is what they're creating. But the only way to push back against that is to come with a hard traditional stance of moral black and white. And it turns into this constant battle. And truly, I believe it's a faith battle, it's a spiritual battle. You are going to take a stand on one of these two areas. And so if you are, oh no, oh my goodness, some of these things in the chat. Okay, it has become a market. Well, Eric, if it's become a market, then it needs to not be funded by our tax dollars. That's what I have to say. And I do stand on that it shouldn't be paid for by our tax dollars.
I agree. It should not be subsidized. And then you get into the issues of like stem cell research and that. I mean,
You don't need aborted fetuses anymore for stem cell research because we can pull stem cells out of fatty tissues. We can pull it out of
Are they the same quality of stem cells?
yeah. You can pull an actual stem cell out of these areas of your body, recreate it. And this is actually how they do stem cell therapy now is they'll pull it out of your body and then reinsert your stem cells into your body. Isn't that amazing?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
And so,
but back to
but to get back to the social decay, Socrates said there would be social decay, number one. Number two, there's a book called The Brave New World. Brave New World. You should definitely take the time to look into it. It starts off a little slow, but the setup, as soon as you start getting into it, is very telling about us today and what's going on today. You begin to see this dehumanization of what humans are. We begin to think of them as fodder. They're starting to genetically modify people in the beginning, and they're talking about their processes for that. You're beginning to see the destruction of human life and morality. Children are being 5-year-olds are being told that they need to go jerk off. I mean, right out the door, they're being told, go yank it, young man, or go, whatever, young girl. I mean, right out the door. When abortion clinics are seen almost like a church, they're worshipped and glorified in this case. When women are expected to drop their pants for any man who wants it, whenever people are working, they have this very entitled mentality. 4 hours a day is the workload that's upon them, and then the government is supposed to subsidize everything else. Let me ask, what is the quality of life? You begin to start seeing people within this scenario, they're turning to drugs and alcohol forms in order to keep going. And so if you really want to understand where things are headed and where our society is going, you need to start reading these books, Brave New World, 1984, and things of this nature to truly understand. Get into Orwell, understand Animal Farm. You'll start to see people were excited for a time in all of these cases, and then it led to an enslavement of the mind and a control over what you say, think, and act. And that's something that we have to fight against. And an area where Republicans, conservatives, libertarians, constitutionalists, we can unite in that area because all of us believe that you need to be allowed and permitted your free thought.
yeah, it's.
And what is up with
I mean,
Grant?
let's talk about legislating morality, right? That's something that we've heard both on the left and the right, right? The left feels like the conservatives want to establish a code of ethics in regards of a moral hierarchy that revolve around traditional family values, and then the conservative feels like the left wants to create a moral hierarchy revolving around the oppression Olympics or victimhood status and power structures, right? Judging people based on their identity within this intersection of power and society. And I think the conservatives are right on this, and this is something that Jordan Peterson has spoke about, and something that I think correctly the left points out about conservatives and Christians. They're hypocrites, right? And I don't mean that as a way of saying that they're worse people, because I think if you would try to establish a code of ethics at all, and you're not perfect, you're going to be inherently you cannot determine um, uh, a moral hierarchy without falling short of it. And so you can't determine a moral hierarchy without, in some sense, being a hypocrite. But what's worse, to be a hypocrite who strives for the best, or to be a moral relativist who's not a hypocrite, but they have no moral code whatsoever. And
Well,
it. How do we discuss conversations around legislating morality?
So let me just ask you a quick question here. Can you give me an example of a law that is amoral?
I think victimless drug crimes are immoral laws.
Amoral
Amoral.
means that it doesn't have a moral implication. Can you name any law that doesn't have some kind of moral implication?
Marijuana laws.
Okay,
The
so
tax. I agree with him. The tax code.
okay, tax code or marijuana laws. So tax code, this one's pretty quick and easy. So the taxes, what is the purpose of taking taxes?
I think it's to rob people. I think taxes are immoral.
Well, what is the purpose according to our founding fathers?
I think they wanted to establish some kind of means to provide a common defense. Can you do that without taxes?
Can you?
Can
Is
you?
it enforceable without a tax of some kind?
I mean, if somebody was going to rob my house or rape my kid, I wouldn't need to tax my neighbors to stop it.
So I agree with Eric that the taxes should be simply there to sustain the protection of our nation, and also we did take on the burden to make sure our representatives were paid appropriately. As in, they're going to lose a year's salary as a representative, therefore they receive a year's worth of salary of the average at their time, and they're exempt from taxes during their point of service. Okay, that was the original thing. Taxes do have a use to a degree, and what the use is to enforce the laws, pay for the enforcement of the laws that you are generating and creating within a specific area. That's the purpose of them. Now, when you give somebody too much power in order to control those taxes and fees, that's when you have a problem. That's why I didn't like the repeal of the Gallagher Amendment, for example, where now here in Colorado, you've gutted Tabor out, which means it's no longer required for the government to ask the permission of the people to increase our taxes. Now they can just increase our property taxes without being stopped. That's what the repeal of the Gallagher Amendment did. And that's a problem. It creates a control issue. Why don't I agree with a welfare state? I don't agree with a welfare state because it forces a tax increase because they're saying, oh, we need to take care of the people who are there. Really, all that's happening is we're throwing a bunch of money at a problem without creating a solution. Now, where's the moral implication in this? Taxes and the tax codes have a lot of philanthropic components to it. A lot of our tax exemptions are built around philanthropy. Are you giving? Are you donating? Are you sharing into these charity organizations? Are you giving into these foundations that are supposed to better the community? Oh, you did? Great. You get a tax write-off, right? And so there is a moral implication even within our tax codes as you start to break down what's within them and where you're getting your removals from, right? Oh, this person wants to give money or make sure that they have prepared themselves for a health crisis. Great, we're going to give them a tax write-off for that.
Hold on, real quick. I just think we should start playing a game. Good Jason, bad Jason. What will it be today? Because we go.
I agree with Jason. I agree with him on this federal.
We go from comment to comment where I'm like, yeah.
And audit the Fed. By the way, destroy the Fed. I don't even want the Fed. No more Federal Reserve. I'm sorry. I'm completely against the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, most of these foundations are used for money laundering. It's another loophole for the elite to shelter their money. But then again, I think everybody should be able to shelter their money. I'm going to do a shameless plug here, guys. I recently wrote an article. It's on libertyrevoltmedia.com called Elections welfare, and money printers, a dangerous combination. So I just want to read a piece out of this and talk about, is it legitimate for the government to confiscate money from one American to engage in welfare towards another American? Because our founders actually did sound off about this. So let's see. I'm going to read like the first couple paragraphs here. LibertyRevoltMedia.com. There's almost no easier way in today's political climate to succeed in our current electoral process than to engage in demagoguery, opposition tactics, grievance peddling, and to trot out the notion that government can and should provide free services and or redistribute money for charitable purposes on behalf of the people. It is easy to see how the idea of expanding or constructing new government agencies to address the social and economic problems of the poor and disadvantaged grants believers a sense of virtue and politicians a sense of moral duty. Of course, we the people want to help the less fortunate, and I have no doubt that most politicians begin their careers on the local level genuinely wanting to do good. But just as you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, we should never judge a political agenda by its intentions. We shouldn't judge a piece of legislation by the benevolent name given to it, like the Happy Puppy Dog Act, or even the rhetoric espoused by those promoting it. We should instead be hypercritical and skeptical of all state action. It should be acknowledged that the state is inherently socialist, anti-capitalist, and it derives all of its utility through its attempts to monopolize force and generates all of its revenue through the threat or implementation of force and coercion. We should always judge policy by how it is enforced, its results, and our ability to accurately measure these results, as well as their unintended consequences. And because of the very nature of politics and government programs, we should always ask ourselves, what is the legitimate role of government in a free society? And do the policies pushed by politicians or even by popular demand fall within that role of government? I would contend that they almost always do not. I would like to begin with a simple initial premise of self-ownership, private property, and personal responsibility. That is, that I am my own property. I am not the property of the United States Congress, that you are your own property, not the property of the United States government. And for better or worse, we are responsible for our own choices and outcomes. To violate either of these is to violate the very notion of a free state, because you cannot be free if you are not your own property and or if you are not responsible for yourself. This premise of self-ownership and personal responsibilities are the foundations of the idea of morality and individual autonomy. Murder, rape, slavery, robbery, and theft are all immoral because they violate the premises of private property and self-ownership. Unfortunately, we as a society have been incrementally abandoning or even outright reversing this moral principle when it extends to government policy. A massive portion of the American people has become convinced that it is not only okay, but even a moral act to use the gun of government to forcibly take the private property of one American for the purpose of charity towards another American. And I say the gun of government because that is exactly what it is. The government only solves problems one of two ways, either by throwing bullets at the problem or throwing money at the problem. I don't need to explain how the gun is involved in the first so-called solution, but the second solution is backed by a gun as well, because the truth is the government doesn't have any money. The government only acquires money through taxes enforced by the threat of violence or through inflation. Even when the government prints money, it does so with associated debt that it pays for, by the way, through taxation backed by gun violence. If you do not believe me, play it out. Refuse to pay your taxes. Eventually, if you ignore them long enough, government agents will track you down and physically confront you. If you continue to refuse, eventually they will attempt to arrest you. If you resist arrest, you will discover that, yes, indeed, every government law, regulation, and tax is upheld by the threat of gun violence, unless your name is Biden. If our laws weren't ultimately backed by the threat of lethal force, then they wouldn't be laws. They would be suggestions. Mao Zedong was correct when he stated, political power grows from the barrel of a gun. Remember that when you're debating someone who is calling for the government to redistribute money or more laws and regulations. You don't get to claim the moral high ground while advocating for state-sponsored gun violence, no matter how moral your intentions. In 1794, the Third Congress of the United States held debates on whether to allocate aid to French refugees in the aftermath of the Haitian Revolution. James Madison, considered the father of the Constitution and the fourth president of the United States, got on the floor of the House in 1974 and angrily contended, "I cannot undertake to lay my finger on that article of the Constitution which granted a right to Congress of expending on objects of benevolence the money of their constituents." What he meant by this was not that charity was bad. He believed that charity was a very noble personal act, but that it is not the role of government. James Madison also stated in his speech, "The government of the United States is a definite government confined to specified objects. Yes. It is not like state governments whose powers are more general. Charity is no part of the legislative duty of the government."
And I agree with that completely. Charity is not the business of government. And the sooner we get that into our minds, the better it is. But again, it's apparently you owe Jason a tremendous amount of money, Bucky.
Hang on. I know he's charging me. Let's see if I can go back.
I'm charging Bucky a talking too long tax.
I want to tax Kavika for me to listen to him.
Yep.
Jason will charge a vision tax charged to people for looking at me.
Yep.
Bad Jason. We need civil understanding that law and communities to use court to enforce them. Law enforcement has essentially bloated since 9/11.
I do agree with Jason. I think that we need to end the federal income tax. I do agree with Jason. We do. And I'm willing to go on record for this, by the way. I also agree with Jason that we need to dismantle the Federal Reserve Bank. No more centralized banks and centralized banks. So, and I agree with Jeff and Eric. Yes, charity is not the responsibility of the government. And so with that, that's something that we're actually sympathetic towards each other with those. And Tracy is right. There are too many laws, but a lot of those laws are happening because people are trying to legislate their own ideologies into the mix, as opposed to sticking with the Constitution. That's why we have the Supreme Court and a process to challenge those ideas.
Good, Jason.
Do that, destroy that. Yes, Eric is a good dude. I like his stuff. So that being said, we need to actually take charge and start doing that. We need to start going in there and we need to start fighting in the legal system. The problem is that we keep allowing candidates who are more liberal minded and more Democrat leaning to start appointing all these judges and start appointing all these we start voting in all these DAs that are liberally minded. And now what they've done is they're utilizing the Supreme Court, they're utilizing the judicial system as a means to promote activism instead of what it was supposed to be for, which was to tell the government to go take a flying leap off of a cliff for laws that are...
Of course they are, because the left is statist, and the government, the state, is an entity which tries to maintain a monopoly on violence, and it is always looking to expand its ability to implement violence and expand the territory over which it has a monopoly on violence. So of course they are. If you're a statist, you're going to use whatever tool. And you know what? This is something that Black has argued. The three branches of government, right? You have the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative. And the judiciary is supposed to be independent, right? But it is in the very nature of government that the government itself determines the limits of its own power, because you cannot set up a truly independent judiciary outside of an outside government, an outside force. So how can the Supreme Court be independent when it is when all of our court nominees are put into place by the other branches of government. And it is perverted almost, the state has perverted almost any means of 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 controlling or establishing limits on the state, and perverted them into institutions to legitimize the state. And the Supreme Court is a perfect example, right? How many times has the Supreme Court done something unconstitutional, ruled something unconstitutional, and therefore gave validity to the fact that the government can overstep its boundaries and transcend its limits over and over?
Sure. And that really comes to who is appointing them and who we elected. And we've elected quite a few people who fit a model of trying to be activists, which is wrong. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be sticking in with our Constitution, focusing in on things that are effective by our Constitution. And
I agree. The Constitution only works. I agree with Jason. The Constitution only works if you have control over your money and have some level of control over force in your society. That's why the Second Amendment and the abolishment of the Federal Reserve are some of my two primary issues. If you don't control the currency by which you trade, and you don't have the ability to physically defend your Constitution, then your Constitution is worthless. And I've heard libertarians trot that one out. What good is the Constitution? Perhaps we should throw it in the trash because it is A, either authorized the government we have today, or B, done nothing to stop it. It's an idea. And it's an idea that only works so long as people have A, the capability, and B, the will to defend it.
Well, and therein is the problem. They have to have the will to defend it, and they have to have the will to actually be able to go in to the lion's den, take the hits, take the calls, and be willing to run for offices to incite the change. And I do agree. I think Hamilton's policies. I'm with you on that one, Jason. Yes, Thomas Jefferson wanted this. Alexander Hamilton got that restriction taken out. But there were some problems that were going on there. Is that it all became about the money, and it all became about this control factor. And the fact that George Washington, though he was our first president and arguably one of our better ones, the fact of the matter is that he created a tremendous amount of problems because instead of listening to the people who were pro restricting or not having a Fed Reserve, not having a centralized banking system, it wound up creating problems. And people like sorry, I'm losing my train of thoughts here. Hamilton were seeking to create these institutions because it was something that they knew would work in a short term in order to spur on our work, but he wasn't thinking about our long-term situation. And now we are completely beholden to private entities as a nation because we're indebted to these private entities. Yes, we are living in Hamilton's thing. Thank you, Jeff, for saying what I'm not allowed to say.
Yeah.
And this is actually where you see one of the differences, right? So this is an area where I tend to lean more libertarian in my beliefs versus like Austin, who absolutely loved Hamilton's ideas. And
it's interesting because I feel like you have
worshipped it.
I've heard psychologists say that there's two types of people in the world: those who see the opportunities first and the obstacles second, and those who see the obstacles first and the opportunities second. And I think in my personal life and by my temperament, when I'm out there in the world, I'm someone who sees opportunities first. And then, for example, you go to Sam's Club and you always have the people handing out food samples, right?
Mm-hmm.
I always see the sample. I don't notice the line. Half the time I bypass the line and I just walk up to the booth and be like, I want one, right? And I'll walk right past people who are standing there in line and pick one up and eat it. And then you have people who walk by the same sample stand and they look at the line and they say, right? I think in my personal life, I'm someone who sees the opportunities first and the obstacles second. But when it comes to government, I just see a gigantic obstacle. And Hamilton is someone who saw the opportunities first, the opportunity for a centralized government to be more effective at doing certain things, and saw the obstacles to liberty and property second. And I would say that myself and Jefferson probably saw the obstacles to liberty and property first when looking at the government, and the potential utility of the government second.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the primary differences between more freedom oriented people versus more social welfare oriented people, or conservatives, libertarians, and progressives. The progressives see the utility in government. They see a problem, they want to get it done. They look at the government and they say, here's a great opportunity to do something about it. And the conservatives say, we can't use that, because once you give the government the problem to solve that problem, next thing they're going to do is look at you and say that you're the problem, and they're going to look for a final solution.
Yes. Well, and that is what happens. So I know I have to go here in a
Yeah,
moment.
I do too. I try to keep these down to an hour.
My wife is not going to be happy with me at this stage. So but with that said, when it comes to taxes, when it comes to that, there is a component to that. The moral implication is, what are we allowing to be permitted within that tax, and what is the utility of that tax? And that's where the moral component is, because when you start looking at the underlying, it was for defense, was the original intention for that, and to make sure that the people who weren't going to get paid because they were representing would be covered their normal, whatever their average yearly salary was, not being able to get rich off of politics, but whatever their average salary was. And that was the original intention.
I don't think you need to use the forceful coercion of government to get people to voluntarily defend themselves.
So what's the alternative? Is a fee?
The alternative is convincing people that the defense of the nation is worth voluntarily supporting.
Well,
and I don't think that's a hard case to make.
Welcome to the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. Welcome to the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, sir.
If people really feel like terrorism is something that they need to be afraid of, they'll voluntarily contribute to supporting an entity to stand up against terrorism. There's free market solutions to almost all of that.
That's not true. Because look what happened to Washington when he was fighting there. He lost a good portion of his military because Philadelphia refused to help them.
Okay.
And yet he was there fighting for their freedom. He had made the case. They said they were going to support them. They didn't. Instead, they gave housing to the British because the British had money, and so they went where they knew they were going to get money, as opposed to the ones who were actually fighting to preserve their freedom. They were willing to quarter the British soldiers for free.
Okay, so there's one example of a government maybe almost sort of kind of doing the right thing. But again, I think if you have to threaten people with jailhouse and bayonet to defend themselves,
every revolution was fought out of those types of situations. So I mean,
But
that
again,
mhm.
if someone were to try to violate my household, I wouldn't need my neighbor to steal my money to go buy a gun and stand on my doorstep. I would happily stand on my own doorstep and or even lend money to my neighbor if he was happy to stand alongside me.
That was the point of the Second Amendment. But there are times where we need a standing army, and we do need to be able to pay for them.
Why couldn't the army be paid for voluntarily? Why do you need to coercively confiscate people's money to pay for the army? Why can't people, if they care about it, they will voluntarily contribute to that?
Let me ask you. I'm gonna come over there right now. We've got a terrorist organization just up the street. Are you going to pay for me to go fight them?
If the terrorist organization was up the street and they were threatening me, yeah, I think you and I could band together just fine.
Okay, now let's ask the people in the comment area. Hey, Jeff, would you pay me to go fight the terrorists right next door?
I think Jeff would be one of the first to go fight them alongside you.
Okay, now, are you going to feed our bellies too?
I don't see how. What are you saying? That people won't support each other for the common defense voluntarily?
I think that if you were to check them and try them out, no, I don't think they would. I think that we're putting way too much optimism into human beings who are geared towards a tremendous
optimism towards human beings. If you can't grant people the competence and the moral character to defend themselves and defend their, if you can't trust people with freedom, how are you going to trust people with power over them? I guess is what I'm saying.
With regular,
you can't trust people to defend themselves. How do you trust somebody else to defend them on their behalf?
Okay, so that's where this,
that will be the question for next time.
But that's going to be a question for next time. But what I would say is that if you're living in a morally relativistic state, they aren't necessarily going to do that. They're going to say, it's my money, my right, my morals, and I will do my own. And I've seen this time and time again. Part of the poverty mindset, this is something that a lot of people don't understand about poverty. The poverty mindset isn't financial at its root, but it's rather people who say, oh, I don't have enough, so I'm not going to give anything into it, even if I believe in the cause. And you see that a lot in politics, right? So I'm leading a political party. I'm one of the leaders within a political organization. And people call me all the time saying, we've got Democrats there and they're terrorists and they're destroying our cities. And I say, can you give us $5 to help us fight the fight? And guess what they say? What do they say? No. No. Why do they say no? Oh, well, I can't afford it right now. Oh, you can't afford it right now. But you want to complain about that, but you don't want to help me fight. Well, will you come walk the streets with me? And they say, no. Why? Oh, well, I don't have time for that. I'm working.
So your justification is to essentially rob them for their benefit, for the common good?
So they agreed to some of those things because they vote on it. What do you think a mill levy is?
I think if people saw, because here's where I'm concerned. Right? If people are voluntarily spending their money for the common defense, they're going to spend it much more carefully, and that's going to be a lot harder to corrupt. As soon as the government can tax you to therefore pay for their apparatus of force and violence, then they're going to be coming up with all kinds of threats out there to justify you paying into their apparatus of force and violence.
Okay, so why do the tax? Because now what happens is it's a pooled resource that has a set allocation that is traceable.
I got to go home, man.
It also, people can pool their resources without some government bureaucrat threatening to arrest them if they don't. Anyways, guys, we're going to continue this conversation next time. It's been an hour. Kavika, you're a great friend of mine. I sure do appreciate hanging out with you, man. And I love our conversations. The comment section was on fire today.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone, I hope you have the most wonderful night. If you want to support me, check out the Liberty Revolt page for my GoFundMe to help cover the tuition into the leadership program of the Rockies. More info on that when you find the link. If you're not into it, fine. No worries. I'm not going to tax you for it, unlike my friend Kavika.
I'm not going to tax you for it. That's something that they're giving willingly for something that you don't have to take part in.
I'm just giving you a hard
That's why
time.
I don't believe in welfare programs, sir.
Hey, bro, I'll see you tomorrow at the Reagan Roundup. Tell everyone about the Reagan Roundup.
Yeah, Reagan Roundup tomorrow. Adams County has the Reagan Roundup over at the Adams County Fairgrounds. We open doors at 5:30. Bucky Dillon is our MC. We have Jimmy Sangenberger as our keynote speaker. I'll be doing all the introduction work as the acting chair during that time because our chair is not going to be able to make it for a while. But come on out, come help support us because we are fighting to try and accomplish a change that must happen. And, you know, every time I see Jason's mutton chops, I think of Wolverine. I'm just waiting for him to get you right now, Bucky. He's right there. So come on out, join us 5:30. We have seats available. They're limited, but come. And they're only limited because of space. We don't give too much rats about that.
All right, see you guys. Bye, Kavika.
See ya.